I believe Matthew in this moment is not thinking about his germophobia or his OCD tendencies. He's thinking about someone's broken in front of me, just like I was broken. Hey, it's Dallas, and it's time for another director reaction. This time my reaction is to episode 6 of season 2. If you remember in my last reaction video to episode 5, probably our most controversial episode yet. I still wonder why to some extent, but it still kind of makes me laugh. But there were 3 moments in that episode that were pretty significant, caused a lot of conversation, some anger from some folks. So there was a lot of anticipation for episode 6. Does this address some of our questions, some of our concerns about the characters? They were really nervous about Mary Magdalene in particular, because as episode 5 ends, she is leaving the group and she is in the process of backsliding, and people weren't quite sure where she was going to go. So does episode 6 answer some of these questions? Of course. So let's just get right into it. So right at the beginning of episode 6, people are waiting, of course, to see what happens with Mary Magdalene. What do? We take you thousands of years previous, and we take you to the time of King David. We don't bring David in right away because David is, of course, one of the top 5 most famous and impactful people in the entire Bible. And so we wanted to make sure that when he's introduced, it's in kind of a cool way. So we've introduced you to Moses, we've introduced you to Joshua, and now we're introducing you to David. So we start with Ahimelech. Now you can look up more detail on this story and more backstory about the bread of the presence, but this is actually a pretty well-known story, and Jesus references it later in this episode, and he references it in the Gospels, of course. And this is the story of when David was so desperate and so hungry that he asked Ahimelech for this special bread that was reserved only for specific people. When David comes into the scene, he just burst right in, and that's our introduction to David. And we knew it was important not only to introduce him in kind of a cool way, but also to have the right actor. And Jorge Franco plays David. He's fantastic. You never know when we're going to use these characters again, and so we wanted to make sure we got this one right, of course. And one of the cool things about this particular scene was when Jorge first came in, the first couple takes, he and I had discussed the character beforehand, and I think some of my initial direction was wrong. We had David as really desperate, David is really scared and concerned, and after a couple takes, I think we both felt something was a little off. I for sure felt like I hadn't quite nailed it yet, and so I told Jorge, why don't you try coming in as Jack Bauer? Jack Bauer, the main character of 24. Instead of being like weak and for sure you're desperate, but what if that desperation comes from a position of strength? You're asking for help, but you've got a little bit more strength, a little bit more confidence in yourself in general. When you communicate, just communicate how Jack Bauer might communicate in this situation. So that really seemed to unlock the scene for both of us, and I think it helped escalate the intensity in the scene a little bit and helped end it on a high note. Now, if you look up the story of Ahimelech, it's actually quite tragic. He actually mentions in this scene that he's risking his life in helping David, and that turned out to be true. It's an awful story, and it ends with Ahimelech and dozens of other priests and members of his family being slaughtered in a really horrible way by Saul. It's quite fascinating how this particular story had huge implications for generations, and of course many, many years later when Jesus is facing off against the Pharisees in the wheat field, which we get to later in this episode. So after the opening credits, we've got Simon and Matthew. Now, we know that they've been assigned by Jesus to work together, and this is one of those situations where Simon, because he's forced to do something for Jesus, he's got to be on his better behavior. He might normally take this opportunity to really nail Matthew and follow up on some of the anger that he's had in the past, but in this case, he needs to be a good guy. He needs to be protective. He needs to make sure that Matthew is kept in one piece. And in the process of doing that, I think this is a lesson for life. When we are forced into, or when we force ourselves to do the right thing, even if it's not necessarily for the right reasons initially, behavior oftentimes changes our mindset and changes our heart. Now, Simon isn't ready to forgive Matthew yet. Matthew hasn't apologized yet, but Simon isn't ready also to accept Matthew as a colleague. But you start to see the cracks show just a little bit, partially because Simon has to respect Matthew a little bit because Matthew has some good ideas, but also because Matthew starts to show a little bit some humanity. And anytime we are forced to realize the humanity of people that we don't like, things change a little bit. And you see Simon see Matthew's humanity when Matthew reveals, unintentionally of course, that he might have a little bit of a crush on Mary, or at the very least, he finds her unusually pleasant to look at, which I think eventually should be on a shirt because I think it's such a great phrase. But that's when you see Simon, he knows more than Matthew knows in this case. Matthew isn't probably fully aware of his emotions and how to process them. Simon is an expert at that. And so Simon is able to look at Matthew and go, I not only find this amusing, but it's also humanizing. Then we go into Mother Mary and Rama. And this scene might not have necessarily been epic, but I do believe it was important because Rhema, I believe, represents the audience. The audience is thinking, why didn't Jesus go after Mary Magdalene? The audience is thinking, why didn't Jesus just make this all better? Why would he allow this to continue? Why wouldn't he come to the rescue? Why would he put Matthew and Simon together? I think all of these things are causing the audience to wonder what's going on, and I think Rhema is speaking for them, and I think that is also a reflection of life. A lot of times we have questions. A lot of times things don't make sense, and there are multiple ways that we can respond, and Rhema's doing, I believe, the right thing. She's expressing it. She's venting it. She's saying, this bothers me. This confuses me. And Mother Mary doesn't try to say, no, it shouldn't confuse you. No, you should be perfectly fine with everything. But she does say, we do need to trust because Jesus has in the past and will continue in the future work things out on his time and in his plan. And that's not easy, but it is something that we have to embrace and something that we have to accept. We find out, of course, eventually anyway, that Jesus does have a plan, and Mother Mary's just ahead of the game here. She's seen Jesus do this enough times. She trusts Jesus. She knows that Jesus is the Son of God, and so for her, it's a little bit easier to accept. And I appreciate the patience that she shows Rhema in this scene, because I think that's something we need to show other people too, is that everyone is at different levels and everyone comes at this at different times, and Rhema's a little bit new to it. So that scene, I think, just represents where the audience is coming from, and this is something we do a lot in The Chosen. We call them audience surrogates, and that's where we pick a character for a particular scene or for a particular episode for whom the audience is going to see the storyline through their eyes. And that's a really important thing, because if all of the characters have arrived and all the characters have figured everything out, A, they become way ahead of the audience, which isn't always a good thing, and B, sometimes things can be a little bit confusing, and sometimes we need characters to represent us for our emotions and also for our information. And so in this case, I think Rhema is representing our emotions. Now, before I get into Mary Magdalene in the bar, which of course there's a lot to unpack there, I want to very quickly ask you to just hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't done so. It really does help us out and gets the channel in front of more people. And the way that we're able to give you these videos totally for free and keep doing this and pay for this camera and this light and all this stuff is because of thechosengifts.com. Binge Jesus is back, so you can check out Binge Jesus shirts and hoodies and all of that fun stuff in the store, thechosengifts.com. Just check it out if you get a chance. The sales at thechosengifts.com are how we're able to do videos like this, so thank you so much. All right, Mary Magdalene in the bar. Yikes. I told you in episode 5 that things probably weren't going to get better. In fact, they might get a little bit worse. I know some people were hoping that when Mary Magdalene went to the bar that maybe she was there to kind of tell people about Jesus, and that's not the case. Mary Magdalene has officially been triggered. She is officially going back to her old life. And I did a conversation on video with Ryan Swanson, our head writer, and Liz Tabish, who plays Mary Magdalene, in the Come and See show. So if you see on our YouTube channel, there's a video called the Come and See show, which is about episode 6, this very episode, where I did some interviews. We had a huge, great live event. It's a really fun video. But in that, I had a discussion with Ryan and Liz about this whole storyline and what would have caused Mary Magdalene to go down this path. And Ryan, our head writer, talks at length about his own struggles with alcoholism and how those triggers worked, and Liz talks about her experience playing this role. It's really fascinating, so make sure you check out that conversation. Mary Magdalene has been triggered. Mary Magdalene has now made the decision, I don't want help, I want to go deep into this. And so when she's sitting at the table and she's gambling and she's essentially relying on all of her old tools, whether that's her alcohol or her ability to gamble or her comfort in situations like this where she's surrounded by people who don't necessarily have her best interests at heart, she might be actually a little bit more comfortable in that environment. And that's true of a lot of people. Sometimes it's easier because they might struggle with intimacy or because that's how they've been living for so long. She's actually more comfortable in this environment temporarily. But there are triggers that get you to go back to the bad parts of your life, but there are also triggers that can get you back to the good parts and can get you back to the present and to the reality and to the healthy version of you. And in this case, just as much as Mary had triggers that sent her reeling and sent her into the depths, there are some triggers that can get her out of it. And in this case, it's the memory of her father. That very moment from the very beginning of episode 1 of season 1, when Mary's father is talking to her and gives her those words from Isaiah 43. And when she's looking around at these men, this was a key moment on the set, and we talk about it in that other video, so you can get more details there, but there was a key moment when Liz actually said to me, what is my motivation here? Like, what am I struggling with? And one of the things that I said was, when you look at these men who are sitting around this table, these men are supposed to be your brothers. They're supposed to be the disciple. That man sitting there who's leering at you, that's supposed to be Simon. And that guy who's just wanting your money or who's trying to mansplain you or trying to dominate you or intimidate you. That's supposed to be Thomas. It's supposed to be those boys that you know, that you trust, and that you can be with and know that they've got your best interests at heart. And that completely unlocked the scene for both of us. And that causes her to escape. And of course, she doesn't even think about the money at this point. She leaves the money behind because right now she just needs to get out. These men are not for her. And she knows men who are, and women who are. So we got these two back-to-back moments all in the same camp where you've got Thomas and Andrew and James and John. They're observing Simon Z and briefly Thaddeus and little James as they are wrestling with what it is they're doing. And I actually call these scenes disciples wrestling with what the heck they're doing scenes. I think it's a really key human moment. I think these moments are what, for me, connect me to these people. Because if I was following the Messiah in person 2,000 years ago, and things were always looking a little bit differently than I expected, and I was also wondering how I got picked, these are the kinds of scenes that speak to that for me. It's also an opportunity to show Allah do some more really cool moves. Now, again, we did actually do some research to make sure, and he did some research to make sure that those moves were rooted in kind of a Middle Eastern historical approach to things. But yeah, just really cool seeing the actual actor, not a stunt guy, for Simon Z do those actual moves. And now we've got Simon and Matthew not really finding Mary. That's what's kind of funny about it, is that for all of the work that they're doing and all of the prepping that they're doing and all of the wrestling with it and the assignment that they've been given by Jesus, they don't actually find Mary. Now, they get close to her because Matthew understood what the Roman was saying about going downstairs, and he connected that to Jesus's Bible verse about going into the depths. When you think about it, they ultimately find Mary because she sees them. Maybe it's a little bit easy, but I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on the searching. That's not really the point of this whole storyline. The point of this storyline is that Mary has strayed, Mary has descended, Mary has backslid. And the process of how she gets back to Jesus and what happens when she gets back to Jesus is far more important than the process of Matthew and Simon looking for her and all of the deep and dark things that she does while she's away from Jesus. The point that we really wanted to make in this scene between Mary and Matthew and Simon is what we feel like as human beings. When we have strayed in our life and Jesus rescues us in some way, that's one thing. But when we relatively quickly do it again, it's even harder to accept forgiveness and grace. It becomes even more shameful, and we are even more embarrassed. And we wanted to capture that to its fullest extent. And so this scene was not meant to be pretty. I talked about this with Liz about this is not going to be a smooth scene. There's going to be nothing pretty about it, nothing glossed over. We're going to go through what it looks like to be fully hung over and to be fully depressed and ashamed. And she says one of the most beautiful lines, in my opinion, in the whole show.
He already fixed me once. Broke again.
On the set, that wrecked me. I think every take she did it wrecked me. I would come up to her to give her some, whether it's notes or just to discuss the scene, and I had to gather myself because I've said that. I've been there. Maybe I didn't say those words in exactly that way, but that idea of I thought I was good. I thought I was fixed, and then I broke again, and I can't face him. I've been there many times. You've no doubt been there many times. To see that Mary Magdalene, a hero of the faith, a follower of Jesus, could go through that as well. And I do believe, as I said in episode 5, I do believe that the disciples of Jesus did things like that. Maybe not this specific storyline, but I do believe these kind of struggles, this notion of, I thought I was good, I thought I was fixed, I think is something that anyone can identify with. The way that Liz delivered it was so beautiful. And we didn't want to, when she throws up, we didn't want to make a huge thing out of that. We didn't want to show it or anything like that. It wasn't necessary. I think the point was made. But this is once again where you see Matthew ridding himself unintentionally, almost unaware because of his new passion. And it's this scene, this moment is not about any romance or about a crush that he may or may not have on Mary. This is about he has a purpose now. He has a desire to help, a desire to give and to share in the way that he's been given to. Jesus rescued him. And so I believe Matthew in this moment is not thinking about his germophobia or his OCD tendencies. He's thinking about someone's broken in front of me, just like I was broken. And it's the first time that you hear Matthew admit it. I'm a bad person. And that's a huge moment for Simon. We actually see Simon look at Matthew and go, He's acknowledging what I believe, that Matthew has had his major issues. Again, it's not an apology. It's not personal yet, but it is, again, a little bit of a crack, little bit of a chink in the armor for Simon in his approach to Matthew and his feelings about how Matthew operates. And so this scene, like all the scenes that we do, is about more than just the main thing. There are other things happening in this scene and other relationships that are developing or growing in addition to the primary one, which is, of course, Mary's relationship with Jesus. Then we've got what I consider to be a pretty fun scene. We filmed this in Utah, in this extraordinary set in Goshen, Utah. The main pillars that you see when they are walking down this long row of pillars, this seemed like the perfect scene to use that set for. Those are all real. I mean, they're not stone, but they're foam. But those are that tall, and those are present and physical, and you can touch them. There are more pillars that extend further down, and then there's a wall that goes along behind that isn't real. That was created in visual effects. If you would have seen that in the original shot, and the actors were actually walking in front of a blue screen, because if you would have looked straight down that hallway, you would have just seen empty field. And so they put a wall there, and so it just added some more depth and some more texture to the scene. And this scene is an important scene. This is yet another step in this road towards the Sanhedrin ultimately, as we know, spoiler alert, killing Jesus. And when you go to where they ended up and to their anger and their vitriol and what led to that, it wasn't just an overnight thing. It took a while for it to develop, and we wanted to show you that. We wanted to show you the humanity of it. We want to show you that Shmuel, for him, this is important. And he's not thinking yet of Jesus being killed, of course, but you're seeing some of these early seeds being planted in the fact that Jesus is so egregiously contradicting what they believe are truly important teachings. It wasn't just black and white, where all of a sudden they just told the Sanhedrin, Jesus is doing these bad things, and the Sanhedrin went, yeah, let's kill him. It wasn't like that. And we want to show you that nuance. We want to show you that historical context and that cultural context, and you're going to be able to see over the next few episodes the differences in what we introduced in episode 5, is the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. So that was just a scene that I thought was fun. I thought it looked interesting. The opportunity to shoot on that set was extraordinary. It was visually one of my favorite moments of the show, just because we got a chance to shoot down those pillars, and they're so cool. Just my own little geeking out on that moment. But then we've got a moment that has nothing to do with visuals and everything to do with emotion. And in fact, the scene ends up in a small tent where, the visuals are small. I mean, this is not an epic scene. There's no visual effects. It's just 3 people in a small space having an extraordinarily large emotional and spiritual moment. This was the scene that I believe represents the gospel more than any scene that we've done in these 2 seasons. And it, in fact, has just a couple of words that reflect the gospel as much as anything that we've done. And that's the phrase, look up. Mary is ashamed. She doesn't want to face Jesus. She's not sure how he will react. She hasn't experienced this kind of situation before. She hasn't experienced this kind of love before, this kind of grace before. The men in her life up until this point, other than her father, were always trying to take something from her. And here's a scene where she's with someone who wants to give her something significant, the most important thing. And it's just a small scene, but it's about something historic, and that's the gospel. And when she's ashamed and looking down and Jesus says, look up. And what does she say? She says, I can't. He says, you can. Look up. Those 2 words, look up, I think in many ways the message of the show. I mean, if you could boil it down to something, there's lots of different phrases that we use to describe this show. Binge Jesus is one of them, but that has nothing to do with the content. That has nothing to do with what they were actually talking about 2,000 years ago. This notion of look up. When you are ashamed, when you are low, when you have reached a dark point, when you are desperate, look up. Now, of course, there's so much more to that, but those 2 words say so much, and I think that's what is the key moment of that scene, is when he says, look up. And then, of course, the opportunity to be forgiven directly by Jesus of Nazareth is something extraordinary, and I hope that you, as the viewer, were able to watch that scene through Mary's eyes, and so that when Jesus says, I forgive you, that it can feel personal to you. And then we get the first big major glimpse of what is sending Andrew on a path towards kind of emotional destruction. We talked about the triggers that sent Mary down a dark path. This is the trigger that sends Andrew down a dark path. Andrew actually followed John the Baptist. He was one of his disciples, and that's from the Gospels. There's that moment in the Gospels where John the Baptist has Andrew with him and says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And that sends Andrew off to Simon. That begins that whole process. And so when the guy that you followed and was kind of your first rabbi in many ways, or literally actually your first rabbi, and he's arrested, but this time for good. This time life imprisonment. This time it feels different from any other times that may or may not have happened. And for Andrew, it takes him to a dark place. He's new to this. And we've had a lot of you who were upset by how Andrew behaved in episode 7, which we'll get to in my reaction coming up in a little bit. But this is where the seed is planted. It didn't happen overnight for Andrew. He's not used to facing this kind of stress, this kind of weight, and he doesn't necessarily have all the tools yet. Salvation may happen in a moment. Sanctification takes time, and Andrew's not quite there yet. And I think that's true of all of us. I mean, we're never fully there yet. As Jesus says to Mary Magdalene, not now, someday, when we're on another side of eternity, we will get to the point where we are living in our perfected selves. But now we still struggle. And this is the beginning of Andrew's struggle. And you're seeing him start to descend. We also get a chance to see Philip as a leader. We also get a chance to see multiple disciples, including Simon Z, wrestling with their old selves, the old versus the new. And you actually see this moment when Philip is even tempted to be like, yeah, I would like to see a fight. And then he says, no, we're not doing that. We are now on a new path. And that's the old you, Simon. Philip was actually saying that to himself as well. Maybe the old Philip would have liked to see something like that or even participated in something like that, but now he's new. And hopefully we're like Philip. Hopefully when we are tempted to go back to our old selves, that we have those moments, we take those moments to recover. Andrew's not recovering quickly. Mary didn't recover quickly. Philip's been doing this a little bit longer. And so maybe Philip's able to kind of more quickly recover and get on that new path. Then we've got the wheat field scene. The first part of the scene, they're just walking through it. This was so cool because this wheat field existed just outside of our set in Goshen. The Jerusalem set that's in Goshen, just across the street, was a wheat field. And so when we were trying to figure out, how are we going to do a wheat field? Is this going to all be visual effects? Are we going to have to find chunks of wheat and plant them? And it turns out, thank you, Lord, there's a wheat field just across the street. And so we were able to film it there. And because they were about to be knocking down a lot of it anyway, they let us do whatever we wanted. So we were able to actually create a path in this wheat field. And they were so cool and gracious to let us do that. So that was really cool. And now we've got the miracle of the hand, the miracle of the withered hand, a story that I was looking forward to telling. And this is one of those miracles where in the course of The Chosen, you see multiple miracles. And we come at them from different directions sometimes. Sometimes we tell you all the backstory of the person who's being healed because we think that we really want it to be an emotional moment. Other times, the miracle is about something different. And so, for example, in season 1, when Jesus heals the man who's lowered through the roof, that miracle is about the faith of this man's friends. And it was also, for us, about the relationship that he was having with the Pharisees. Well, this is somewhat similar. We don't get to know much about the man with the withered hand in this scene because this scene is about more than that. It's not about necessarily the backstory of the man, and this scene wasn't actually very emotional. It was more intense, and this is more about the relationship, again, that Jesus is building with these Pharisees and with religious leaders in multiple locations. And so you're starting to see Jesus taking a show on the road, and some of this is impacting multiple people. And so from different directions, the anger and the resistance to Jesus is developing, which is why when we ultimately get to future seasons, it's all going to culminate in Jerusalem. It's not going to be quite as long of a journey to get to that point because of what we're setting up now. In this moment, we see Jesus facing off against the Pharisees in some way. He wants to do something beautiful. He wants to do something important. He wants to, in many ways, save someone's life. Now, it's not literally life or death, but it's a significant health issue, and the Pharisees are only concerned about the law. We also got a chance for our visual effects team to show off just a little bit. Obviously, this hand wasn't real. We didn't actually heal a withered hand on the set. Everything about that hand was created from scratch. What's interesting is we were rushing this episode just like we were all the episodes. We wanted to get these episodes out to you as fast as possible. In the first version of this episode that we did on our live stream, we tried some things with the hand that I thought were realistic, and I actually still do, but where you see some of the fingers popping back into place. Our visual effects artist who did this, Will, he had the same thought. In fact, I think he had the thought even before I did, which was after a hand that's been atrophied for so long, when it's coming back into play, the bones are going to be popping back into place. And so he did that, and I thought it looked really cool, but I think it ultimately ended up not looking realistic. I mean, who knows exactly what it would look like for a withered hand to go from withered for years and years to all of a sudden perfectly healed. Who knows what that would look like? It would be kind of funky, but I think it ended up looking too funky. I think it threw a few people off, and so we decided to redo it and make it a little bit smoother. So on the app, I don't know if it's happened yet at the time of this recording, but on the app we're doing that scene just a little bit differently, smoothing the hand motions out a little bit more so that maybe, I don't know if it's more realistic or not, who knows, maybe it's not quite as distracting. That was an opportunity we had to make things a little bit better, but I do think that scene overall was really extraordinary in terms of the visual effects. I was so proud of our team for pulling that off because I think it really looked cool, and I don't want you to watch these scenes thinking the whole time about the visual effects. That's why I don't love to do scenes that are too supernatural, because I don't want you watching it going, oh, I wonder how they did that, and then you're completely taken out of the scene.
Excuse me. What are you doing? What is your name?
The water's getting stirred up. And whenever the water is getting stirred up, you might hear a little bit of a shaker. Things are about to go down. And that's one of the things that I love about this music. And I think it just helps us keep these miracle scenes feeling a little different. We don't want every miracle scene to have the exact same music and the same style and the same approach to it. We wanted to mix things up a little bit. And that's what we were allowed to do with this scene. To anyone who is wondering whether or not we believe Jesus is God, he asserts it, maybe in a subtle way, but right here in this scene when the man says, if he was supposed to be God, he would have done it himself. And Jesus says, interesting point. And of course, that means Jesus is God. God did do it. So just want to make that clear in case you are wondering about that or you know someone who is. We do assert that Jesus is God. We did in episode 1 of this season when Jesus says to John, I am who I am. That's an assertion that he is God. And then again in this moment. So, and that takes us outside. And that takes us to a pretty well-known story in the Bible, the one that calls back to what David experienced because Jesus references it. And that's when Jesus allows his disciples to eat on the Sabbath. That wasn't necessarily a biblical rule. That was more of a traditional rule, what Jesus was allowing them to break. But he was reminding them of what David did and that we don't put rules over life. And sometimes rules are meant to protect life, and sometimes we are meant to protect life at the expense of rules. And this was not at the expense of a biblical rule. This was at the expense of something traditional. But either way, it completely sends the Pharisees into a dark place, and it sends them ultimately to the final scene of the episode. And magically, I changed outfits. Actually, we found out we had a little technical difficulty, lost some footage at this point, so I'm re-recording it, just the ending here. So decided I'd mix things up a little bit a day later. And, nice binge Jesus had, I think. So anyway, we've taken the two Pharisees now into their office, and we get a chance to see a little bit behind the scenes, again, of this build-up towards the future. And here, with these two guys, you see it from multiple angles. And so now we're seeing that these two Pharisees feel like this is an opportunity for them to be taken seriously. They've been part of this small town. They have not been taken seriously by the larger establishment. They say it. There's a moment in the scene where they realize, gosh, this is a big deal. Someone claiming to be the Son of Man comes into our synagogue. Now, we don't believe it. We think he's dangerous, but this could be an opportunity for us to have a hand in making some really key decisions. And so they're going to go to Jotapata, which is a place where there's a lot of religious extremism, where it's a hotbed of protests, it's a hotbed of anti-Roman sentiment, and they know that there are going to be some key leaders there. These guys know that this is their chance to be taken seriously. And we close the episode with that sentiment. We close the episode with him saying we need to pray for justice. And it's not only justice for what Jesus has done in general, but it's justice to what he did to their synagogue. And as you saw from the older Pharisee, he says, you've made a mockery of our synagogue, and they take it personally. So we're going to start to see from multiple angles and from multiple locations this build of resentment and intensity and anger and hurt towards Jesus. And these are the steps that are taken towards the ultimate devastating climactic moment of the show, which is coming in a few seasons. But we're seeing these grumblings start here. So there you have it, episode 6. Hope you enjoyed that deep dive. We will be doing it again in episode 7 coming soon. Hope you'll check that out. In the meantime, remember, it's not your job to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish, and I will see you soon.